Hello, my name is Mary Corey. I'm the director of the Data Coordination section in the Division of Special Education. This presentation will be an overview of the world of special education data collection, reporting, and usage. This presentation is one in a series of trainings to inform the field of the major topics in special education and changes in state and federal regulations. Resources and handouts for each of the presentations in the series can be found at the website shown on this slide. The Division of Special Education welcomes questions that participants may have after viewing the presentations. Questions can be submitted to the email address indicated on this slide or by calling us at 573-526-0299. We hope you enjoy this series of trainings and find the information useful in your role as an educator, parent, advocate, or other individual interested in the education of children with disabilities. Other topics in this series include discipline, finance, the special education process and changes in IDEA, the complaint process, administration of special education, response to intervention and early intervening services, and transition. The State Performance Plan and annual performance reports are both required by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 2004, or IDEA. IDEA outlined several monitoring priorities, and from those, the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs, developed 20 indicators that every state has to address. 14 of those indicators apply at the district as well as the state level. Targets for 6 years have been established for each indicator, and progress towards the targets is reported each year for the state through the Annual Performance Report, or APR. In addition to the state-level reporting, public reports are posted on the School Data and Statistics webpage for each district. A large part of this training will focus on data collections for the SPP indicators. In addition to the data collections required for the SPP and APR, various other data collections are mentioned throughout IDEA. All of the items listed here are either specifically mentioned in IDEA, many of them under Section 618, or they fall under the Secretary of Education's authority to collect other information. The Division of Special Education does not collect any information that is not required either by IDEA, the associated federal regulations and data collections, or the State Performance Plan. This presentation will go through various data collections and is organized in SPP indicator order. Before we start talking about the specific data collections, there are a couple of terms that I will use repeatedly. Most of you are probably very familiar with these terms. In the DESE world, a screen is a data collection, and there are approximately 30 screens in the core data collection system. If you're dealing with any of the DESE data collections, it's really important for you to have a copy of the core data manual, either in hard copy or as a web link. The first half of the manual has instructions for every screen, and the second half is made up of exhibits that contain the code sets needed for reporting on the screens. Again, it's really important to have a copy of the manual and to review it every year for changes. A link to the manual is on this slide. We also notified districts prior to the collections via our special education listservs, CELS and CELS 2, that the collection is coming up, and as a reminder about changes that may have been made. MOSIS is the Missouri Student Information System. It's being used to assign 10-digit IDs to all students served by Missouri Public Schools, and eventually the data will be reported on a student level rather than the current aggregate data collection system. The core data screens will then be populated with the data. So instead of you or your student systems compiling the aggregate number of kids, you will report each student separately, and then our system will add them up. At this point, the MOSIS student level collections are being piloted, but will become mandatory within the next year or so. There is one data collection for early childhood special education that we will talk about later that currently requires you to include a MOSIS ID. Districts are supposed to be assigning IDs for all children receiving services, which includes children in early childhood programs. For more information, please see the website on this slide. We're going to go through each of the SPP indicators that apply to districts and talk about the associated data collections. The first SPP indicator addresses graduation rates for students with disabilities. And the second indicator addresses dropout rates for students with disabilities. We will talk about the data collection for these two indicators together. Graduation and dropout rates for students with disabilities are calculated using data from Screen 12 of Core Data. Screen 12 is in the June cycle and collects exit data for students ages 3 to 21 by building, age, disability, gender, race, ethnicity, and limited English proficiency. Similar data, but in less detail, are reported in the IEP column on screen 13, which is the secondary headcount screen. The data from screens 12 and 13 are used for various purposes, including federal reporting of state data, the public reporting of graduation and dropout rates, determining whether an improvement plan is required as part of the special education self-assessment, evaluating grant applications, and determining AYP. Most recently, the graduation and dropout rates for students with disabilities have been used by the division when assigning the special education determination level for each district. The age that's reported on screen 12 should be the age as of December 1, so it will correspond with the age reported for child count purposes. Data notes and other technical assistance are available on the data coordination webpage in the exiting section. There are 4 exit codes that are combined into a total dropout count for each district. Code 3, received a certificate, is for students who leave school with a certificate of attendance, which is not a diploma. These should be relatively rare since, according to state guidelines, a diploma can be awarded if a student meets the goals and objectives of his IEP. Code 4, reach maximum age, indicates that the student left school at age 21 and did not receive a diploma or certificate of attendance. Again, we would hope that this situation would be relatively rare. Code 7, move not known to be continuing, indicates that the student is no longer at your school and you don't know where he ended up, and there have been no requests for records transfer. Code 8 is for all other dropout situations, including if a student drops out in order to take the GED. The exception to this is if the district is using the Missouri Options Program and is awarding a diploma when the student passes the GED. So again, all students aged 14 to 21 who are reported in these 4 categories are counted as dropouts. All of these categories are considered dropouts for screen 13 purposes as well, so total dropouts should be very close, if not equal, between screens 12 and 13. The formula for graduation and dropout rates that we're using for the special education profile and public reporting are on this slide. The graduation rate is the number of graduates divided by the total number of graduates and dropouts from that school year. At this point, we are not using a cohort dropout number due to the way the data are collected. We will probably change this as student level information becomes available through MOSIS. The dropout rate looks at the total number of dropouts divided by the child count for ages 14 to 21. Note that the denominators for these 2 calculations are different, therefore the rates cannot be added together. Now we're going to skip over several indicators so that we can cover all of the secondary transition indicators together. Indicator 13 looks at transition plans for students with disabilities by looking for IEPs to include coordinated, measurable annual IEP goals and transition services that will reasonably enable the student to meet the post-secondary goals. For more information on the requirements for this indicator, we encourage you to view the presentation in this series that is devoted to post-secondary transition planning. The data for SPP 13 is gathered through the Improvement Monitoring, Accountability, and Compliance System, or IMACS, in the year prior to a district's MSIP review year. The district will review a number of transition plans while conducting the file review using a transition checklist. Compliance supervisors will then review that information, and if non-compliance is identified, the items will be on the district's corrective action plan and will require correction within 12 months. Information on quality transition planning and the transition checklist is available on the division's webpage. These data will be included in public reports as the data is gathered from districts throughout the MSIP cycle. A final indicator that deals with secondary transition is indicator 14, which looks at post-school follow-up data and the percent of youth who are employed or continuing education after high school. Graduate follow-up data is collected on screen 8 of core data. Screen 8 includes a column for reporting follow-up for students with disabilities. When calculating the percentage of students employed or continuing education, we compare that total to the number of graduates reported on screen 12 from the previous year. The SPP indicator calls for follow-up on all students leaving high school, including dropouts. Instead of asking districts to conduct follow-up on dropouts, we are attempting to use the dropout hotline data along with various statewide databases. Please ensure that your district is reporting all dropouts to the hotline so that we can do that follow-up. SPP Indicator 3 deals with the percent of districts meeting the state's AYP goals for the disability subgroup and participation and proficiency rates for students with disabilities on both the regular and alternate assessments, MAP and MAP-A. We access these data from the assessment section at DESE, so there is no additional data collection for districts. These data are used for various purposes, including federal reporting of state data, the public reporting of assessment results, determining whether an improvement plan is required as part of the special education self-assessment, evaluating grant applications, and, of course, for determining AYP. Most recently, assessment participation and performance data have been used by the division when assigning the special education determination level for each district. Indicator 4 deals with suspensions and expulsions and is split into two pieces. The first looks at significant discrepancy in suspension expulsion rates of children with disabilities. The second looks at that information by race and ethnicity. Screen 9 is used to report discipline incidents for all students, including students with disabilities, and is also used to report the number of safe school violations. The items listed on this slide are reported for every discipline incident resulting in an out-of-school or in-school suspension, expulsion, or unilateral removal. These data are collected in the June cycle of core data. We use the data reported on Screen 9 to address the SPP indicator for public reporting and for federal reporting of state data. Now we're going to talk about several SPP indicators that use the December 1 child count data from Screen 11. Indicator 5 deals with school-age placements, including special education placements in regular education, placements in self-contained settings, and placements in separate settings. Indicator 6 refers to ECSE educational environments. The wording for this indicator is new for this year due to the change in the reporting of ECSE data that occurred for the 2006-07 school year. We will need to establish new targets based on the new data. Indicators 9 and 10 look at racial ethnic disproportionality and whether or not that disproportionality is a result of inappropriate identification. Data are used to identify districts with disproportionate representation, and then a review of the district's policies, procedures, and practices would be used to determine if there are issues with identification procedures. So the data from Screen 11 are used for SPP indicators 5, 6, 9, and 10. Screen 11 collects what we call child count, which is the unduplicated count of all students ages 3 to 21 in the school district who have IEPs and who are receiving special education services as of December 1. Lots of technical assistance is available on our website. One quick note is that the old speech language disability category was split into two categories, speech impairment and language impairment, for the 2006-07 school year. You may have noticed that we use the term placement for school age, but educational environment for ECSE. Technically, what you're reporting for all ages is the educational environment. However, for school age, often, but not always, the placement and educational environment are one and the same. So what's the difference between those two things? The placement is the decision that the IEP team makes regarding how special education services are to be delivered. The placement decision is required to be recorded on the IEP. The educational environment, on the other hand, refers to where the child is spending their time. For school age, if the IEP team decides that services will be provided primarily in the regular classroom, then the educational environment and the placement are the same. The only categories for school age that are truly environments and not placements are the correctional facility and parentally placed private school student categories. So a student in a local jail would still need a placement decision on the IEP, but for Screen 11 reporting purposes, the code should be the correctional facility code. Early childhood special education uses only the educational environment, and very rarely can the placement and educational environment be crosswalked. The IEP still needs to show the placement decision, but the environment needs to be reported on Screen 11. There are technical assistance documents and worksheets on our website that can help you determine the educational environment for early childhood special ed. While we're on the subject of ECSE, I want to mention a couple of issues we had with last year's ECSE child count. One was confusion between the ECSE separate class and separate school. The separate school environment should be relatively rare in that it means that the IEP team decided that the child needs services in a separate school that is only for students with disabilities. A separate classroom, on the other hand, is more or less the ECSE classroom concept, even if that classroom is housed in a building that is physically separate from other district buildings. ECSE students should be reported by the district of residence, not the district providing services. The exception to this is in St. Louis County only. Just a reminder that students attending state schools for the severely handicapped, Missouri schools for the blind or deaf, should not be reported by the district of residence. These students are reported by the state-operated program. Please look over the technical assistance documents that we have posted on our website. One is a chart to help you know how to report various types or situations for students. I think you'll find that one particularly helpful as you're compiling your information for the December 1 child count. So we use the data for Screen 11 for quite a few things. First, when we talk about an incidence rate, we're comparing the special education child count to the total district enrollment. We also look at the percentages of students in various placements or educational environments by comparing the number in a particular category to the total child count. And these are the calculations used for SPP indicators 5 and 6. For disproportionality, we use the data to compute risk ratios, which in a nutshell is the likelihood of a student in a particular race category being in special education compared to the likelihood of a student of any other race being in special education. So, for example, if the data show that the black incidence rate is higher than the incidence rate for all other races, then the risk ratio will be high for that black population. If risk ratios exceed a certain level, that could trigger the review of policies, procedures, and practices that I mentioned earlier. Now, back to the SPP indicators. Indicator 7 looks at early childhood outcomes by assessing where a child is at entry and exit from ECSE in 3 areas: positive social emotional skills, acquisition and use of knowledge and skills, and use of appropriate behaviors to meet their needs. During 2006-2007, the division held regional trainings to train ECSE personnel on this new data collection for early childhood outcomes. Any child entering ECSE after October 2006 was to be assessed and then assessed again when they leave the program. Currently, these data are being collected at the end of the year and would include any entries and any exits that occurred during the year. This is when the MOSIS ID comes into play. If you had a student enter ECSE in 2006-2007 at the age of 3, you should have sent the entry ratings for that child to us at the end of the year. If that child exits ECSE in 08-09, you'll send the exit information at that time. In order for us to calculate the outcome for that child, we have to match the entry and exit data, and we are using the MOSIS ID to do that match. Once we have that data, we evaluate the progress made from entry to exit of the ECSE program. For more information, including the training PowerPoint and the tools that were used, refer to the website on your screen. Indicator 8 deals with parent involvement and reads the percent of parents with a child receiving special education services who report that schools facilitated parent involvement as a means of improving services and results for children with disabilities. We are collecting these data from the MSIP Parent Advanced Questionnaire, or AQ. We look at 2 items from the AQ. First, my involvement in my child's education has improved his or her achievement, and second, the school encourages parents to be involved. If a parent agrees with both items, then they are considered to be in agreement for purposes of this SPP indicator. These data will be included in the public report of data as it becomes available for each district. Indicator 11 looks at the percent of students whose initial evaluations were conducted within appropriate timelines. This is a compliance indicator with targets of 100% for the state and districts. Indicator 12 looks at the percent of children referred by Part C prior to age 3 who are found eligible for Part B and who have an IEP developed and implemented by their 3rd birthdays. This is also a compliance indicator with a target of 100%. For both of these compliance indicators, the data are gathered in IMAX the year prior to the district's MSIP review. You will receive much more information on this in the MSIP special education trainings the year prior to your district's scheduled MSIP review. These data are included in the district's public reports, and if the data indicate non-compliance, a corrective action plan will be required. We have now talked about the data collections associated with the SPP indicators. There are just a few other data collections that I want to touch on. The first is the personnel data collection on screens 18 and 20. Please note that there are several TA documents available on our website, and Exhibit 16 in the Core Data Manual is devoted to special education data reporting for these screens. A change for 2007-2008 is that the special education contact number will not be collected for special education teachers, and the screen will not calculate a caseload. Personnel data are used for federal reporting purposes and are evaluated for highly qualified and appropriate certification purposes. IDEA 2004 required a couple of new district-to-state data collections. One is regarding parentally placed private school students. This is very different information than the child count that is collected on screen 11. This collection looks at what occurred during the school year in terms of the number of parentally placed private school children evaluated, and of those, how many were found eligible, and of those, how many were served by the public school. These data are currently being collected via an I-form, which is a web-based fillable form at the end of the school year. A second district-to-state collection is in regard to early intervening services, which are services that the district may provide using up to 15% of IDEA Part B funds to students who have not been identified as needing special education services, but who may need some additional support to succeed. These data are also collected via an I-form at the end of the year. Keep in mind that you are not to report all students who may receive some type of intervention, only those whose interventions were funded by the 15% of Part B funds. You will report the number of students who received early intervening services during the school year, as well as the number of students who received early intervening services in the past 2 years and were ultimately found eligible for special education and had an IEP developed. So we are collecting all kinds of data, and the accuracy and timeliness are really important for several reasons. One, because we must consider the accuracy and timeliness of district data when assigning local determinations to districts, but mostly because the district should be using these data for program improvement efforts, and you can't make good database decisions without accurate data. These are just a few very basic suggestions for ensuring accurate data. First, review the TA documents on the web and make use of the verification and summary reports that we send out. Make sure that edits on the core data screens are corrected prior to submitting the data. The edits are designed to rule out bad data, so use those as the first screening for accuracy. Use the screen print reports available in core data to make sure that the totals are reasonable. Compare data across screens. A perfect example of that is graduate and dropout data reported on screens 12 and 13. Are the numbers consistent across those screens? We have to explain significant changes from one year to the next when we report our state-level data to the federal government. We encourage you to do the same. And finally, and most importantly, use the data for improvement planning purposes. Sometimes it's not until you start digging into the data that you find odd things that may indicate interesting finds or inaccurate data. A good improvement plan has to start with data and systems analysis in order to understand why performance levels are the way they are. A good needs assessment will help you figure out what's working and what isn't. It will result in a list of strengths and concerns. Only then can you design an improvement plan that will impact the performance levels, because the plan will specifically address what is not working through carefully selected strategies. It may take a little time up front, but it will be much more likely to impact performance than random acts of improvement. The process also serves to bring more people on board with the plan, which also makes it more likely to result in positive changes. A good needs assessment will consider lots of information and result in lists of strengths and prioritized areas of need. So where do you start? You use a team of folks and gather and review information. Think about what data sources are available and then start drilling down by asking who and why. There's a theory that says if you ask why 5 times, you'll get to the root of an issue. And to answer the whys, you really need to have data available to you. As a completely hypothetical example, consider a district with a high dropout rate. Keeping in mind that data sources can be quantitative and qualitative, what data sources are available to you? You're just gathering information at this point, and several potential sources are listed here, including Screen 12 data, discipline information, credit and GPA information, transition plans, all that kind of stuff. This is by no means an exhaustive list. There could be many others available to you, and as you work on the analysis, the list could grow as additional questions are asked. So what might be learned from these data? You might learn that the district dropout rate is also high, so this is not just a special education issue. You might learn that dropouts have, on average, half the number of credits of their non-dropout peers. You might learn that 2 work-study programs are available, but serve a limited number of students. You might learn that the school policy on attendance includes loss of credit when a certain number of days of absence is reached. You might learn that transition plans don't meet requirements. You might learn that a credit recovery program is available, but only for select types of situations. So you've gathered some interesting information. The next question is who is dropping out? Again, go back to the data and see what it tells you. And what might you find? You might find that students with emotional disturbance make up a disproportionately large percentage of all dropouts, and that the highest number of dropouts are students with learning disabilities, and that several students with mental retardation dropped out at ages 17 and older, and that most other dropouts are 16 to 17 years old, and that white students have a higher dropout rate than other races. And you just keep going when you find interesting or surprising information. If you were surprised by the high dropout rate for white students, start digging into that. What might you find? Maybe you'd find that all of them were LD students, and that most went on to take and pass the GED, and that those that dropped out were far behind on credits needed for graduation, and that some had repeated suspensions, and that very few had participated in work-study programs. The next thing is to start pulling it all together and asking why. You may find that you need to go back and dig even deeper into the data, but what might you find here? Maybe that dropouts had a low number of credits as juniors and did not have access to the credit recovery program. Why the low number of credits? Perhaps that's related to the district attendance policy that prevents students from getting credits when they miss a certain number of days of school. So why are they missing so many days? Perhaps because of the high discipline rate, resulting in lots of out-of-school suspensions for those who later dropped out. Why is the discipline rate so high? Maybe the students weren't engaged in the traditional classroom settings. Why aren't they engaged? Maybe they don't see the traditional classroom setting as meeting their needs, and they need more access to work experience programs. So there you have just identified a potential root cause, the lack of work experience programs. The next step in the improvement planning process is to determine what your objective is. In this case, it might be to decrease the dropout rate for students with disabilities, or you may want it to be even more specific than that and target the LD population. That choice is yours. And then you identify strategies that will address the issues you discovered in the needs assessment process. Would instituting a remedial reading program help? Maybe, but the needs assessment didn't identify that as a need, and many of the dropouts are passing the GED, so it's doubtful at best. Would a school-wide behavior support system help? Possibly, because it addresses the high discipline rates. Would it help to increase work experience opportunities for LD students? Absolutely, because that is exactly a conclusion that your needs assessment brought you to. Will this solve all the problems? No, because you still have other dropouts. Remember the MR students who are dropping out at the older ages? There may be other root causes for other populations of students, and when you have multiple areas to address, you may need to prioritize your efforts, since you may not be able to do everything at once. Without doing the data drill down, would you have reached the same conclusions? Maybe yes, maybe no. But having done the drill down, you can target the interventions or strategies to those students most likely to drop out and really make a difference. This was a very abbreviated, not to mention hypothetical needs assessment, but hopefully it showed how important it is to start the improvement planning process with a good analysis of data. For more information on improvement planning, check out the information on our website and the trainings that are available through the division and the RPDCs. Thanks for spending some time with me. I hope it was helpful. Contact information is on your screen. Feel free to call or email with any questions you may have.